Hi, in this video I'm going to talk about the three remaining groups of organic molecules. See right now if you can remember what the four groups of organic molecules are. Try to say it out loud. So we've done carbohydrates, now we're going to talk about lipids, and then we'll talk about proteins and nucleic acids, as well as the carbohydrates. So we've got four groups there. So let's talk about the lipids. They say they're diverse in structure and function, but they have one common characteristic, and that's that they do not dissolve in water. All the other types of organic molecules do, and so this allows lipids to do some unique things. Another characteristic of lipids is that they have a very high energy per gram. And so when you think about the energy dense foods, they're typically high in lipid. And as a result, both plants and animals can store lipids to be a form of energy storage. So we are aware of that the fat that we have stored in our bodies is a form of energy storage. So we're going to talk about the triglycerides, which are the fats and the oils, as well as the phospholipids, which make up cell membranes, and the final group, steroids, that make up the sex hormones, and we're going to mention cholesterol. So here's a first group of lipids. It's called the triglycerides. It's the fats and the oils. And you can typically tell the difference from a fat and an oil just by looking at them. Fats are typically animal in origin. You can think of a piece of meat and the fat associated with it. But and that tends to be solid at room temperature, whereas oils tend to be plant in origin and liquid at room temperature. Both of those are in a group we call triglycerides, and you can see that there's 3 fatty acids and 1 molecule of glycerol. And if you look at this, it should start looking familiar that you can take this water molecule out of there and hook these together. Remember, we're making big molecules out of small molecules. We can do this dehydration reaction and get 1 molecule. So there's 1 molecule of fat, and oils go together the same way. So triglycerides are really important for long-term energy storage. It says insulating against heat loss, providing a cushion around our bones and major organs. There's a lot of interesting information about saturated, unsaturated, and trans fatty acids. We don't really have time to go over it, unfortunately, but you'll get that in your next biology class, I bet. I do want to mention that saturated fats are or fats in general, most fats are saturated, contribute to a disease called atherosclerosis, and that's when that fat accumulates inside of our blood vessels and can cause cardiovascular disease. So it's something that we're always concerned about in our diet, to eat the right kinds of fats and the right amounts of fats, and so are the right amounts of lipids. And so saturated fats, or fats in general, tend to be something you don't want to eat too much of. There's a section, let's keep going. So we have the triglycerides. The second kind of lipids I wanted to talk about are the phospholipids. And the phospholipids, they go on a lot about the structure, but what I want you to know is that the phospholipids make up the barrier between the inside and the outside of cells. All cells have a phospholipid, what they call a bilayer, 2 layers of phospholipids, and they're drawing them right here. It makes sense that cells have a lipid layer on the outside because cells are watery inside, and cells are also found in watery environments. Inside of our body, it's moist. If the outside of a cell could dissolve in water, it would be a problem. So the fact that cells have these phospholipids on the outside layer, what we call the cell membrane, makes a lot of sense. So they're called phospholipids. And then the last kind of group of lipids I want to mention are the steroids. And the steroids have a really different kind of structure. Here's a quick cartoon of a steroid. And all steroids have these 4 flat ring structures. And this one happens to be cholesterol. But all steroids have that basic structure. And steroids are lipids. And they can have all sorts of different functions, but the 2 that are most common in the human body are cholesterol. And it turns out we think about cholesterol as being all this bad stuff that we get in our diet, but we actually need cholesterol to help with those phospholipids making up that plasma membrane, that layer on the outside of cells. So we do need some of that. This is why they particularly tell you with babies, don't give them fat-free milk when they're really little, or toddlers, because they actually need some cholesterol, which high-fat milk will have in it, to help them build their cells. So cholesterol is important there. The other reason why we have a lot of steroids is a lot of our hormones are steroid hormones, and it talks about the sex hormones here, estrogen and testosterone are steroid hormones, so they fall into the group called lipids. Okay, so read over this good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. I guess what one of the main things I want you to take away there is a lot of us have heard of HDL and LDL cholesterol, and they both are in our blood, and they can be influenced by diet and genetics. But the HDL is kind of what we call the good cholesterol, and a lot of people remember the H as happy. So that's kind of our good cholesterol, and our LDL has higher fat in it, and it's what we call our lousy cholesterol, or our bad cholesterol. So L for lousy, H for happy. So look that over. And there's a couple questions to answer. I want to go on to proteins. So section 2.6, proteins. And in your handout, it says, describe the general functions of proteins in the human body. And there's a whole big list of protein functions here. And really, one of the things I'd like you to be aware of is when you look in a mirror, you see protein. Proteins are our major molecules of our body. They're the major structural molecules. So here it says support. Keratin makes up the hairs and nails. Collagen makes up ligaments, tendons, skin, the walls of our organs. Collagen's the most abundant protein in our body. It's providing support. Enzymes are molecules that bring reactants together. They cause chemical reactions to happen. So enzymes are made of protein, and they're absolutely essential for human life. They transport things, they defend us. Some hormones are proteins. We talked about estrogen and testosterone being lipids, but other hormones are proteins, and helps with motion. Actin and myosin are in our muscles. Let's see, describe the unique characteristic of protein shape and why the shape of a protein is important. Okay, so in order to understand shape, we need to understand a little bit about protein structure, and proteins are made of building blocks called amino acids. So just like our complex carbohydrates are made of lots of monosaccharides, proteins are made of lots of amino acids. So amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. And you can imagine that if we took amino acids and we hooked them together, guess what? Dehydration, and we start forming a protein. And proteins might be called peptides. So here's a dipeptide. But once you get enough in here, we probably just call it a protein or a polypeptide. Let's see. So what happens is you take all these amino acids and they're hooked together, and then they end up being so long. Here's a picture. Each one of these little circles is an amino acid. So now we've got a long polypeptide or a protein. And what ends up happening is they end up having unique shapes. And so if we look at down here, they're showing you, oh, here's a coiled protein, or here's a cartoon of a protein that's all coiled up, and it has a distinct shape. And it turns out that the shape of proteins, more so than any other organic molecules, is critical for its function. And so we're going to kind of bring this up once in a while, how important the shape of proteins is. And so the amino acid sequence is going to determine the shape. Remember, we talked about pH, and it turns out it's so important that the pH of our body fluids remain constant with buffers, because that pH is what determines the shape of the protein. It will change shapes if you change pHs, and that could totally disrupt your whole metabolism. There's a word called denaturation, which is the unfolding of a protein. Instead of it, here's an unfolded protein, here it's all folded up. So if we go from here to here, the protein denatured, and it loses its shape, therefore it loses its function. And like I said, pH is important in preventing proteins from denaturing. One example of denaturing a protein, you guys have seen egg whites. When they're in the refrigerator, they're kind of clear and jelly-like. When you heat it up, they become white and hard. And what's happening is the clear jelly-like is made of protein, and they're all just kind of balled up, and they're acting as kind of cushions for the developing chick. If you heat it up, the proteins denature, they unfold, and they all line up on top of each other and become opaque, and they no longer act as a cushion. So protein denaturation or unfolding is really important. Let's see, I think that's all I was going to talk about with proteins. Let's go to the third thing,